Good evening, everyone. This meeting is open to the public and is available through an online platform. Please subscribe to the Township of Wilmot YouTube channel to watch the live stream or view after the meeting. Delegations must register with the Information Legislative Services Department. The only matters being discussed at this meeting will be those on the agenda. We now need a motion to convene an open meeting. Mr. Clerk. It's moved by Councillor Gordick, Councillor Fisher. All in favor? It's carried. Thank you. So before we begin tonight's meeting, let us take a moment to recognize that June is Seniors Month. This year's theme is Stay Active, Connected, and Safe. Seniors Month is a time to acknowledge the many seniors that have served us, making significant contributions to communities across the country. Seniors are an important part of our community, and we appreciate their wisdom, wit, and experience. We also recognize the health and social issues our aging community members face. There are many lifestyle changes we can make to help us and our loved ones lead healthier and happier lives. Let's all celebrate this month by taking the time to thank a senior in your life. I ask Councillor Gerber to read the territorial acknowledgement, please.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Armstrong. We have gathered in Wilmot Township on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Mississauga peoples. We also want to acknowledge the importance of the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, a peace agreement made between the Indigenous nations before settlers arrived. It characterizes our collective responsibility to each other and Mother Earth. We should take only what we need, leave enough for others, and keep the dish clean. By acknowledging this covenant and the First Nation, Inuit, and Inuit and Métis peoples, we are reminded of our important connections to this land where we live, learn, and work together as a community.
Thank you. There are no additions to the agenda. Adoption of the agenda. I understand that Councillor Hallman may wish to withdraw her notice of motion regarding minister zoning orders, which is listed as item 15.2 on tonight's agenda. Councillor Hallman, is that correct?
Thank you, through the mayor. That's correct. I have some revisions to that. So I will withdraw it for this meeting and then have it, I'll submit those to the clerks and have it added to the next meeting's agenda. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I will now ask the clerk to read the recommendation.
That the agenda as amended to withdraw item 15.2 for June 13th, 2022 be adopted.
And that is moved by Councillor Hallman, Councillor Fenning. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Are there any disclosure of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Councillor Fenning.
Thank you, through the mayor. As noted to the clerk prior to the meeting, I have a conflict with the public meeting and will not be participating in the discussion.
Thank you. So noted. Minutes from the previous meetings. Ask the clerk to read the recommendation, please.
That the minutes of the following meetings be adopted as presented. May 30th, 2022, regular council meeting, and May 30th, 2022, closed council meeting.
Thank you. And that is moved by Councillor Fenning, Councillor Gordick. Any comments, corrections, omissions? Seeing none, all in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Next item is a public meeting. This is a public meeting in respect of draft plan of proposed subdivision 30T-0 22601 and zone change application 05/22. We will hear all interested people who wish to speak on this matter. If the decisions of the Council of the Township of Wilmot or the Region of Waterloo are appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal, the tribunal has the power to dismiss an appeal if you do not speak at the public meeting or make written submissions before the bylaw is passed. I now declare the public meeting open. Persons attending as delegations at this meeting are required to leave their names and addresses, which will become part of the public record, and you are hereby advised that this information may be posted on the township's official website along with your email address if provided. Mr. Martin, you may introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Mayor Armstrong. I'll briefly provide an overview of the applications. The applicant's consultant is here to provide a more detailed presentation. And as outlined in the report, a future staff report will provide more significant details on the overall applications, comments received before and after the public meeting, and agency reviews of the technical documentation. So briefly, there's two applications outlined in this report: a zone change application to implement a proposed subdivision application for lands on the east side of New Hamburg, east of Loshire Boulevard. The application proposes a development in the range of 436 to 835 dwelling units, or a density between 47 and 73 people and jobs per hectare. The range in unit count would be dependent on the types of units proposed within the different development blocks of the subdivision, and certainly the number of singles would come down as the upper end of the proposed density would be realized, depending on the nature of how the application were to proceed. The development includes an interconnecting trail network to connect lands that are east and west of this property through an interconnected trail system in the development and utilization of existing and proposed trail networks east and west of this development. Ultimately, the plan proposed will see refinements through the technical reviews of documentation, and certainly we do anticipate that subsequent information will be provided after those detailed documents are reviewed, and again through review of any comments that are provided from the public. I'll leave my comments at that, as again the applicant is here to present a more detailed presentation, and staff are here to answer any questions that may come up.
Does council have any questions of a technical nature for Mr. Martin or Mr. O'Craft at this time? Councillor Hallman.
Thank you, through the chair. I did want to ask a question. It's not so much to do with the technical aspects of the plan, just to do with the street naming aspects of that. I did let Ms. Chambers know earlier today that there was some interest in exploring the relationship between the Indigenous community and the street naming. I'm just wondering if the Director of Development Services or Manager of Planning can just comment on what that process looks like, and if they would be open to further dialogue with the local Indigenous community on their interest with that.
Through your Armstrong, the actual naming conventions and proposed street names would be premature to discuss at this stage in the development. Typically, post draft approval, staff would provide a report to council outlining of the historic naming practices and any names that may be reserved with the region. One component of naming is to ensure that there isn't duplication throughout the entire region, so to make sure it is registered and acceptable to the region of Waterloo. But certainly through that process, staff will be more than willing to work with different interests in looking at the proposed naming for the development, and ultimately that would come up through a report subsequent to draft approval should the subdivision be approved.
Follow up, Mayor?
Go ahead.
Thank you. That was really, really helpful information. Can you let me know when the appropriate time is, if you reach out to me, or if you would like that introduction sooner than later as to how that should unfold? I'll leave that to you to connect with me later as to what the best and most appropriate way is. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. See no further questions this time. We have one registered delegation for this item, Paul Britton, who is present on behalf of the applicant, Wilmot Woods Developments, and has a presentation. Mr. Britton, as an agent for the applicant, you have 10 minutes to make your presentation. You should leave the meeting once your issue has been addressed. You're welcome to watch the remainder of the meeting being webcast live via YouTube. Welcome, Paul.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, council, staff, and viewing public. My name is Paul Britton. The address is Suite 200, 540 Bingham Center Drive in Kitchener. We're local planning consultants. Next slide, please. We're appearing on behalf of Wilmot Woods Development. The principal behind the company is Adam Belsky, a local builder who I think most of you know. Next slide, please. There is a good consulting team that's been assembled. I won't go through each member. Next slide, please. In terms of the subject lands, I think staff have identified them for you. To the north is Waterloo Street. To the east is the Ivan Gingrich Drain. To the south, Woodlot Lands, the CN, future employment lands, and to the west, Woodlot, and an existing community. Next slide, please. 2 applications are before you, as you're aware. Next slide. Next slide, please. In terms of background, the ROP, in terms of the regional official plan, includes these lands within the designated township urban area. So they're intended to be developed at a minimum density of 45 people and jobs per hectare. Next slide, please. Similarly, in your township OP, they're designated for residential purposes primarily. You'll note that the woodlot that's located in the southwest corner of the property is designated for open space and preservation purposes. Next slide, please. Next slide. So we started out in preparing the plan with input from staff. So we did have a pre-submission application meeting. Certain reports were identified to be completed, and needless to say, the applications were submitted and have been deemed complete. Next slide, please. One of the important reports to prepare was our archaeological investigation. 3 reports have been prepared in consultation with First Nations, and pleased to advise that clearance has been received and all reports are entered into the register. Next slide, please. Next slide. We developed a vision in consultation with staff, and part of it is to ensure that we're a logical extension of the existing community. We've got detailed sustainability statements form part of our report. Urban design principles include walkability, active transportation, a central park, and a perimeter walking trail. Next slide, please. Some of the keys: the natural heritage, the protection of the woodlots that are adjacent, proactively planning for parks and open space, walkability, placemaking, and of course, sustainability. Next slide, please. Here's the woodlot that was central. Before we prepared the plan of subdivision, we ensured that the future limits were surveyed, setbacks confirmed, and an overall approach to protecting the woodlot for the long term was developed. Next slide, please. In terms of park and open space system, with direction from staff, we planned for a central park in combination with a perimeter walking trail and an internal sidewalk system with safe crossings. Next slide, please. Next slide, I've covered this off already. We're planning to incorporate placemaking features to make this community stand out within the township. Street trees, signage, decorative street lights, subject to council's approval. Next slide, please. We have developed a sustainability strategy that's incorporated within our planning report. as well as the design brief that's been submitted. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So we've reviewed and explored different road alignment alternatives, and we landed at the next slide, which identifies the preferred access alternative for the subdivision. So next slide, please. So it includes the extension of the existing streets and services, as well as a connection to Waterloo Street. Next slide, please. In terms of built form, we plan for a transition in built form to ensure compatibility. So the adjacent homes are larger lot residential. So we've included open space stormwater management and a community trail so that no lots are immediately adjacent to the existing community, and the adjacent lots that are proposed are single detached dwellings. Next slide, please. We've got a variety of unit types and densities. I think as staff have noted, they range between 47.5 to over 70 people and jobs per hectare. The higher densities recognize that staff's direction to achieve a more compact built form within the township. Next slide, please. We've coordinated higher densities, the missing middle, adjacent and in proximity to the park, so that those higher densities can take advantage of views and opportunities for active recreation, which is a fairly standard planning principle. Next slide, please. In terms of the housing affordability, we've incorporated at least a minimum of 30% of all units will be other than singles, and so towns, multis, and apartments and houses. One thing to note is we're proposing an affordable housing contribution that the township can use as contribution to below market housing and capital projects within the township. Next slide, please. We've adjusted land use compatibility, and those details are picked up in our staff report, which includes setbacks, a berm, and a window street adjacent to the adjacent rail line. Next slide, please. We've also adjusted land use compatibility with respect to existing industry, and there's ample setbacks and intervening uses are woodlot lands. Next slide, please. We're proposing universal and age-friendly design measures with requirement in the design guidelines that accessibility housing be provided within the community. Next slide, please. This is the overall community concept plan, which then gave direction to the plan of subdivision. So you'll see the central park, range of densities, missing middle housing, the community trail, 2 stormwater management facilities, and a connected open space, stormwater management, and park system. Next slide, please. So I've touched upon the design elements. Given time, we can come back to that if there are questions. Next slide, please. So our summary and conclusions, and thanks to the good input from staff, is we believe we've addressed some of the key components of the township official plan, standard design features, but also some very special and innovative measures, including a proactive sustainability statement, affordable housing contribution, universal and age-friendly design measures and requirements in the zoning bylaw and design guidelines to implement all of that. Next slide, please. In summary, we believe we've come forward with an application that conforms with the growth plan, the regional plan, the township official plan, and most importantly, represents good planning based on the input we've received to this point. And we recognize that this is the initial stage of the public consultation process, and we look forward to working with the township, the public, staff, and agencies in bringing this this matter to a more refined plan and for staff recommendation in the future. So with that, I would thank you for listening, and we would be pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you, Paul. Are there, Councillor Gordick?
Through you, Mayor Armstrong, I'm not sure if this would be a planning question or the developer or Mr. Britton's question. So bear with me, and whoever feels need to answer, that'd be great. So I see that, I have a couple questions. So I see that the density part is mentioned, but we don't seem to have an intensification rate, and that's a bit of a concern for me. I know that one of the things that we're looking for with moving forward is developing a better intensification rate within our community. So I'm just wondering about that number.
Right.
And going forward, just as an aside, if any future development plans come forward, can we have that included in reporting purposes for future? Just that we as a council know what our intensification rates are in comparison to what our targets are. And the other part is just for my own query is on the plan. There's a section there. They all have different names, so I picked out two in particular. It says BLK 5/4/9 and BLK 6/2. What does that mean? And I'm just trying to figure out what the numbers mean on that with regards to how the subdivision plan is.
Perhaps I can take a stab at answering the councillor's questions through the mayor. I think in terms of the density of the subdivision and intensification rate, they're related concepts, but they're different. So in terms of the intensification rate, that relates to the total amount of intensification as a percentage of the total amount of development within the township, as it relates to the built-up area. So the intensification rate relates to the built-up area. The density relates to the designated greenfield area. So these lands are within the township's designated greenfield area. So there are targets that relate to both density in the DGA as well as intensification within the built-up area. I believe the current township intensification rate is 30%, and the current density in the DGA is 45 people and jobs per hectare. So what you'll see is, with respect to this particular proposal, I'm sort of a council junkie, if you will. I follow councils quite closely and staff's presentations to each council, and I'm aware certainly that there is a desire within the township to make better use of your designated greenfield area to slow the expansion outside of existing designated lands that have been designated for development. So that's why, in part, you'll see our subdivisions come forward with much higher density than the minimum. The average between the low and the high density is roughly 60 to 61 people and jobs per hectare. We're also mindful of Township Council's desire to hit the missing middle in a context-sensitive way. And by that, you'll see that with respect to what we're proposing, maximum building height is 4 stories in proximity to the Central Park, with a good transition from that higher density internal to the subdivision westerly towards the existing community. So there's 2 concepts in play here: intensification, which relates to the built-up area, and density, which relates to the designated greenfield area. And then with respect to the block references, they're simply how they're called out on the draft plan for numerical referencing purposes. So each block technically is required to have its own block reference, because there could be, for example, specific conditions that relate to each block, et cetera. So, it's a requirement under the Planning Act to have each block called out as its own. So I hope that's helpful.
It is, but I understand that. I appreciate that. I kind of figured that part out, but I just wondered what the actual 4/9 or 6/12, or there was a bunch of different numbers, and I wondered what those specific numbers meant. Is that like how many units or within that block? So I was just trying to figure out what the difference was.
Yes, you're correct. It's the unit range within each block. So for example, a block that has 4-9, the minimum unit yield would be 4 and the maximum would be 9. And what we're fully anticipating as we go through the public review process in consultation with staff and agencies, that range will tighten up as we go through the process. So you're correct. That's exactly what it represents.
And thank you, Councillor Fisher.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong. Couple things I'd really like about the concept is the trail system going through it. I think people are going to love that. Plus, the idea that most of the current households that are in Lashendeer area are not going to be backing onto this because there's going to be the stormwater management ponds and open space and that kind of stuff. But one of the questions I had was the height, because I know the Cache development plan, they had 6 stories on there, but I know we have a limit on ours for township for the height. 2 questions I had would be, is there a time frame when this will be coming back? And secondly, I think a lot of the vehicles will be emptying out onto Waterloo Street. So has there been a traffic study done? Certainly could be a lot of traffic emptying out on that. So just curious about that.
Yeah, so maybe to go in reverse order of your questions, Councillor, and again through the mayor, is there has been a traffic study that has been prepared. And the traffic study addressed a number of matters, including the capacity of Waterloo Street, what road improvements might be required at the proposed intersection of what we call Street 2 with Waterloo Street. So the traffic study has specifically addressed that matter. It also informed our review of the road access alternatives and was input to selecting what we're calling the preferred alternative, which is reflected in the draft plan of subdivision. And then importantly, it also dealt with pedestrian movement and active transportation and helped to inform the sort of the sidewalk network, the connectivity to the adjacent community to the west, and then the trail network associated with Ivan Gingrich Drain, and also some proactive traffic calming measures that are proposed. So we really tried to be proactive on all those fronts, but of course with good input from township staff. So I think to a large extent, Mr. Okrafka can take a lot of credit with respect to the perimeter trail, but also the Central Park that's proposed. And we call it Central Park. It's not in New York, but it's central to the plan of subdivision, and intentionally so, because it's also adjacent to open space, but we located it such that it's within walking distance of all parts of the proposed neighborhood. So, you know, I think a lot of good input was received from staff in advance. And I think there was, in terms of time frame, when this might come back to you, it is very much dependent upon agency review, public input, staff's consideration, and what further evolution that may be required in terms of the plan itself. But we're quite excited about bringing this this matter forward, recognizing that you know, intensification is important, but also in terms of your inventory of available lot supply within the township is very, very short. And we've analyzed that together with your staff, but also from a regional perspective. So we think it's in the public interest to augment the available supply of homes, but importantly to deliver on the missing middle as well. So from this point forward, we're somewhat in the hands of staff, agency, and public review, but our intention, of course, is to work with everyone in bringing forward a plan that is supportable by all.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Holman.
Thank you through the mayor. I know through the Community Safety and Crime Prevention Committee, there was interest through the members there to be circulated on draft subdivision plans. I'm just wondering if maybe the Development Services could come to one of our meetings and just share this with them for public input. I'm just putting that out there to see if that's a possibility.
Mr. Okrapka?
Through you, Mayor Armstrong, to Councillor Hallman, certainly we can come to your committee and highlight the plan for them. As we've discussed before, though, it would typically be that they would be involved in setting municipal standards for various things so that the plans would adhere to them, not that every development application would be circulated to your committee. So I know we have had that discussion, and again, no problem at all, though, coming to your committee and highlighting the plan of subdivision proposal for them.
Follow up, Mayor.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for that. Yeah, just to create that distinction, one of the things that was specifically brought up at our last meeting was trails, lighting, and that sort of thing. So it could be just a great opportunity for some people to have share with you and their insights that way. So that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Holm. I see no further questions. So would the clerk please indicate if there are any other persons present who wish to address council in this matter?
Through you, the chair, Mr. Mayor, I do see a couple of potential names who may wish to speak. I would ask those people to please raise your hand and we can give you that opportunity. Mr. Mayor, we do have one speaker who wishes to speak. I'm Mr. Thomason.
Okay, thank you.
Good
Welcome,
evening.
Kevin.
Good evening. And yeah, indeed, I wasn't planning to speak to this tonight. I'm actually on the docket or the agenda here for another item tonight. But knowing how much the regional official plan has been talked about recently and how important the additional urban area is within our communities as we look to intensification, I just thought I'd mention briefly that it's encouraging to see this plan coming forward. It's encouraging to see the talk of some of the principles we've been talking about in terms of density and intensification and trying to plan more complete communities. Haven't had a lot of time just seeing things tonight here for the first time to look at it, but I just want to say that it's good to see some of the principles that we've been talking about coming to life here. There's still maybe lots of work on things. We'll know more, but it's an encouraging first start. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Clerk, anyone else?
There are no other speakers, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. So we'll ask for a second and last time if anyone wishes to speak on this matter. And seeing none, ask the clerk to read the recommendation, please.
That report DS 2022-014 be received for information.
Thank you. That is moved by Councillor Gordick and Councillor Fisher. All in favor? That is carried. I now declare the public meeting closed. There are no presentations this evening. Next item is the consent agenda. We will now move onto the consent agenda. If members of council have any questions and want to remove an item from the consent agenda, please indicate so now, as we will not take questions on consent items unless the items are requested to be moved to the regular agenda. Councillor Gordick?
Through you, Mayor Armstrong, I just have a really quick question, and I guess we'll have to pull it, but 11.1. Really just want to know timeframe when the job's expected to start. So
So are we gonna pull? So 11.1 is pulled, so I'll ask the clerk to read the recommendation for the 11.2.
That recommendation for consent item 11.2 be approved.
And that is moved by Councillor Gordick, second by Councillor Fenning. All in favor? That is carried. Now we'll deal with 11.1. And who wishes to answer that question from Councillor Gordick? Mr. Mullenhughes.
Through you, Mary, glad to answer. The timeframe for the contract to start, we'll have to sit down with the contractor once we get award on our end. And so it's a joint project this year with Woolwich. So we don't know exact timeframes, but we can certainly expect it to be somewhere in June, July, and August for the work to start. I know that's very open-ended, but we don't have much more information for you in terms of schedule until we do sit down with the contractor and talk their schedule through.
just a quick follow-up, because of just the open-endedness, what kind of notice will we give the residents for those two streets? Because Wilmot Street, as we know, is quite a busy street. And then, of course, Hannah is a bit of a closed down street. So just wondering about time frame to give them notice.
Through you, Mayor, direct notice typically when we get to the project execution level, typically within a week at best. Sometimes, unfortunately, with some contractors and particularly with asphalt, we may not find out they're actually coming through until a few days before. So we do try to get as much notice as we can. And typically in major project areas like this, we would give direct notice to the residents and work with them within that time frame, within a week to a few days.
Okay. Thank you. So the clerk read the recommendation.
That the recommendation for consent item 11.1 be approved.
That's moved by Councillor Gordick and second by Councillor Fenning. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. So the next item is the land needs assessment in the region of Waterloo. Just a reminder that Councillor Hallman's alternative motion was already moved and seconded by Councillor Hallman and Councillor Gordick at the May 30th, 2022 meeting and deferred to this meeting. There will not be any further delegations. Council will now continue its discussion on this item. Will staff please display Councillor Hallman's alternative motion. Councillor Gerber.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Armstrong. I was simply just going to note that the motion is in the council agenda package and has been available for everyone to see and is posted. And I just wasn't sure what the screen sharing was for. So we're over that. So that's good. Thank you.
The point of the screen share, Councillor Gerber, was to save the clerk's voice, so he didn't have to read it. Go ahead, Councillor Gerber.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Armstrong. Since we already had several hours last meeting to discuss the report and the alternate motion, I'll sort of share some thoughts to kick things off because there did seem to be a big rush to do that. I would just suggest that our role, the 6 of us elected officials here at the meeting, is to advocate for Wilmot within what the region is doing. Certainly, there's lots of other options, lots of input about what the region may want to do. Soon we will find out the region's first draft of their intentions. There will be so much growth allocated to the region, and the regional review will sort of allocate that growth. And within that, there is likely to be, of course, a measure of greenfield development. We know that greenfield development occurs. We know this in Wilmot. The 6 of us in this term of council have allocated a designated greenfield lands for that very purpose. Some of which is adjacent to Baden, and we heard, I think, over the winter or early in the spring, plans for that to be coming on stream. Some of it, of course, a second parcel adjacent to New Hamburg that we just heard about coming on stream a few minutes ago. And while some may be made nervous because there were some developers who have invested here, who spoke in favor of the staff report on this particular topic, at the regional level, there's many other developers that will be quite pleased if it is their parcels that are developed rather than the ones that this council has planned for and designated. The development I live in bears the street names of the farmer whose lands it once was. We have several other members around the Horseshoe, both council and staff, whose lands where they now reside was also farmland not that many years ago. We want to make sure, I believe, that when the pie is divided up at the regional level, that Wilmot gets its share. No one else is in a position to advocate for that. Our DC budget and capital budget, the amenities and essential services that are built by that rely on that degree of growth coming to Wilmot. I find that the original staff report speaks to that, along with touching on many other important considerations. I believe the alternative motion contains several clauses that will make it possible for the region to believe we are okay for growth to be allocated elsewhere and not necessarily allocated to Wilmot. And again, no one other than our staff and the 6 of us elected to do so are in a position to advocate for Wilmot. As I mentioned, we spent several hours discussing all of this last meeting. I would be in favor of calling the question on the alternative designated motion or the alternative deferred motion, and then also on the original staff report on this topic, so that our opinions, whatever the votes may show that they are passed along to the region, as quickly as possible, because we know the region report is coming shortly.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gordick.
Thank you, Councillor Gerber, and through the mayor. I liked Councillor Hallman's motion more because it tightened up. I actually asked the question of staff this afternoon with regards to development charges, just for some clarification, because of the comment that was made last time about needing DC charges. And I understand that we need development charges for our community to grow, but if we do intensification versus density and without expanding, one of the scenarios that I presented to the staff, as far as just for clarification, they didn't approve or condone my question, it was just that they clarified the response, is that we get $27,369 for a single unit. If we were to build a semi on that same lot, we end up with $54,000. So the development charges can still be retained. And when we run out of greenfield for what we already have designated within our official plan and the region's current official plan, we can always go back for a review in 5 years. The problem that I have with leaving it kind of open-ended with regards to using our infrastructure up to the 10,000 capacity that we have for our stormwater is that we can't take back the land. If we go to the region and say we want 60 hectares, and then we realize that that costs us more money because growth actually costs more than intensification, cost us in building roads, cost us in building drains, cost us in repairs, cost us in the maintenance. Whereas if we already build, for example, if we were to take a large home on Peel Street and turn it into apartments, we still get development charges for those apartments, but we aren't digging up the road, we aren't digging up the sidewalk, we aren't causing any more costs to the township. It's kind of more of a win-win with development charges. Although I'm being simplified, I know, in my speech tonight. There's probably nuances within that, within the planning department, and Mr. Gerber, Terry Gerber and Mr. O'Krafkin can speak to that. But I think we can always ask for land to be designated to us. We can't take it back. So if we tell the region that we're okay with our farmland being taken away from us, and the developer purchases that, we can't go back to the developer and say, oh, well, too bad, we made a mistake. We don't want you to build. So I think Councillor Holman's motion tightens up our staff report, because there were very good elements in our staff report. I just feel that we need to let the region know we do not want to lose any farmland that isn't already been designated within our current official plan. And then intensification will also help us with our DC charges, because when eventually we get to be at capacity, we won't be building a new community center because we already have enough community centers for there. So the development charges that we have will help sustain us to go forward, and we just can do better with some of the, for example, in the Wilmot Woods that was presented, they were looking at the missing middle. They were looking at better housing and affordability and accessibility for our residents, for people who are wanting to move out of their bigger homes into a smaller place where they can afford to stay and be within their community. So I'm going to agree with Councillor Holman on that because of the tightening up of some of the issues that are going in with our official plan.
Thank you. Councillor Fisher.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong. Yeah, I'm going to agree with Councillor Gerber on this one. I did like the staff recommendation myself. I know farmland's important, and development charges are also important. And we've had this official plan for a long, long time, the growth area. And I think the township's done a terrific job of managing housing and where it's going and that. So I was going to ask Mr. O'Krafka if he could comment on the meeting coming up this week by the region. And I guess what I'm wondering is what type of decisions will they be making this week? Does that make what we suggest today kind of mute?
Go ahead, Mr. Krafka.
Through Mayor Armstrong to Councillor Fisher. So our understanding from various meetings with regional staff and the indication from the commissioner planning to this council at the last meeting, originally the plan was to release the preferred concept for growth last week so that it would go to the 15th, which is this Wednesday, to a special public planning and works committee at the region, together with the various background studies on climate change, affordability, those sorts of studies that they have supporting the first three options. As you were provided, that meeting was deferred until the 22nd, which then pushed back the release of the preferred concept by a week. We would expect it to be released later this week, Wednesday or Thursday probably, but later this week we would expect the region to be releasing its preferred concept and those background studies that have been completed. That then will go on the 22nd to the Works and Planning and Works Committee at the region. Our regional staff have indicated, I believe, the public meeting, the formal public meeting on the preferred concept and the draft official plan amendment, which will also be released this week, will be on July 18th, I believe. 18th or 22nd, I can't remember. There's too many dates. And then it will go to regional council for proposed for adoption in August, I believe. August 20th sticks in my head as the date. Sorry, I got too many screens open and not the right screen to have all those dates in front of me. So certainly the region has heard the conversation at the last meeting. Regional commissioner was here, as you're aware, and the manager of planning. They've been at all the regional council, all the area council meetings. Again, meetings today in Kitchener, supporting one option, Waterloo today as well, supporting a different option, or maybe the same option, just worded differently. North Dumfries has supported option 2. Wellesley, as you're aware, has supported the parameters of option 2 as well. And Woolwich has supported the concepts of option 4. And Cambridge, I believe, is not considering the draft scenarios at council. They're awaiting the release of the preferred concept, which again is being released in a couple of days with the background studies. So I don't know if that answers your question specifically, but that's sort of the general scope of what's happening around the region right now. And if you have other questions, I can try to answer.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hom.
I'm not sure if Councillor Gerber had a follow-up to Mr. Okrafka, so I'll just let, nope, I got something else. Okay. So thank you through the mayor. Just wanted to clarify that I did watch both of those meetings closely today, and Waterloo passed option 4, which was similar to the motion that I have before this evening. I did circulate that to council. And also Wellesley did pass a similar option as we did in its option, to similar to option 4 that they did as well. So just wanted to provide that clarification. I don't feel like there's, I shared a lot of my perspective with you all last council meeting. I did not pass an emergency, climate emergency and declaration lightheartedly with this council. I meant it. I look at the rising gas prices, the rising prices of food, and I think of my children. And I think of the intensification that's needed. And I think that we heard from the OFA, we heard from the NFU, and I hope that you reflect on the Hold the Line and you think heavily about that this evening, as it is not just us, it is the generations before us. And I ask that at this time, we do not approve for any further expansion. We focus on intensification that has been so greatly done that it's obvious, as the delegations that have this evening about the Wilmot Woods, that development services within the Wilmot Township have been focused on that as well. That is the direction that I believe is the best for Wilmot.
Thank you, Councillor Gerber.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mayor Armstrong. Just a couple quick things, and then maybe a bit of a process question. Yeah, the development charges per unit. I mean, to me, the take on that I would think is relevant is that whether the units are, I mean, I'm not suggesting that all the units be 4,000 square foot singles spread out on single acre lots. That's not the point at all. But the point is, if we're only allocated 4,000 people, that's only so many units, whether those units are in apartment buildings or semis or singles or wherever they are. Whereas if we're allocated 11,000 units and we're able to reach intensification targets and do the densities that we're seeking, which we're sort of moving towards that direction of Wilmot Woods, then those development charges are there. But once we sort of say that, we're only interested in a small piece of that whole pie, the development charges that go with that, regardless of the type of the development, sort of go along with it. From a process question, I know we have an alternative deferred motion. I'm just curious what has become of the original staff motion then? Like, will we be able to vote on the alternative motion? If the alternative motion passes, does that make the staff report and all the other aspects of the staff report moot? Do we get to also, or do we only get to vote in the staff report if the alternative motion fails? I guess that's sort of a process question. I was just curious if the mayor is voting this evening, or if he'll let us know that later, or what his thoughts are as well.
I can answer that question through you, Mr. Mayor. Right now we have the notice of motion, which needs to be voted on first. If that does not carry, then we would then vote on the staff recommendation as it stands, as presented on the floor.
Thank you. Councillor Fanning.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Armstrong. Just to Councillor Gerber's, excuse me, suddenly a tickle in my throat. The motion that Councillor Holman presented begins with that report DS 2022-013 be received for information and that further. So it begins with accepting the report and then simply presents other so to your question of whether, you know, what happens with that report and all the, it's included. But that wasn't why I put my hand up. If you wanted to respond to that, I can wait a minute with my other comments.
Is that?
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Gerber.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Through you, Mayor Armstrong. I would maybe just ask the clerk then for clarification, receiving the original staff report for information and passing that staff report along to the region as the voice of what council wishes, to me, may be two different things. So I would wish to, again, speaking ahead of time, I would wish to vote on the alternative motion. If it's passed, then that staff reports, I guess it's received for information. But if it was council's interest to make sure the staff report gets to the region as the voice of council, then I would say that the avenue to do that would be to defeat the alternative motion and vote for the original staff motion, not just to receive it as information, but to then pass it along to regional staff as what Wilmot Council has passed. Does Wilmot Council's word, like, because the two reports aren't the same, we can either receive one for information, send one to the region, or send the other one to the region. Sending both to the region would just seem odd to me, but maybe that's what we're going to do.
Mr. Clerk, go ahead.
Yes, I'm not sure I entirely understand the question. There are two items on the floor. I mean, right now there's one item on the floor that needs to be voted on. And the wording is, yes, I would concur that report DS-2022 be received for information and further. That would be treated as such in such wording.
Yeah, so I guess my question is that if we're just receiving the staff report for information, I believe if we wish the staff report to be what we want the region to consider, that means passing the staff report, or maybe CAO Chambers has a thought on that as well.
Yes, through you, Mayor. It would be my view if Councillor Holman's motion passes, that you would simply be acknowledging that you've received the information in staff's report. However, we would be forwarding Councillor Holman's motion as council's official position in relation to the NLA, the LNA. If that does not pass, then you can consider the staff recommendation. And if it passes, then we would be forwarding that along.
Thank you. Is there a follow-up, Councillor Fanning?
My original comments I haven't had a chance to make yet.
Okay, go ahead.
So, yeah, just my only other thing on that, the original staff motion also begins with that it be received for information purposes. So it's, anyway, whatever. Accepting or whatever motion we send to the region, we're not making a decision, or we're not being asked to make a decision between development charges and farmland. I think if I distill what everybody has said, we're all concerned about not about Wilmot not receiving any growth allocation. And I think, you know, it's pretty clear that we all agree that farmland matters. We also all agreed unanimously that we have a climate emergency that we need to take action on. I don't think that we need to consider sacrificing more farmland in order to achieve desired growth. And the Director of Development Services has many times talked about intensification within the already designated areas and the increased density that can achieve the growth that we need to continue to build our community and to continue to build the resources and the infrastructure that keeps our community healthy and strong without sacrificing more farmland. As Councillor Gordyke also pointed out, we can change our minds down the road and expand boundaries. We can decide to do that as a community at a further point. We can't go the other way. And so I think it is imperative that we err on the side of caution, ask the region to allocate growth to us, to allocate growth in our population without expanding the borders, without further sacrificing farmland. And I think that, you know, increased density targets are absolutely necessary along with the intensification. And so that's why I support this motion.
Councillor Gordyke.
So through you, Mayor Armstrong, and to just add a little extra to there, is one of the important points of Councillor Hallman's motion to me that kind of stood out is on top of the climate emergency that we declared. As a grandmother, I, like Councillor Hallman and everybody else on this, but you know, my granddaughter's at an age where she's going to maybe be looking to move on, and I think she wants to stay in our community. There isn't any place for her to do that. She's going to be able to do that in about a year or two. And I like the idea of having to build up our community so that our young generation can maybe stay here and stay with their friends and family and not have to leave and move further and further out west or further and further north. So intensification to me is important for that, as well as the walkability and other things. But the main point of Councillor Hallman's motion that really gets me, that sort of is the point that I want the region to get, is the second point, not to trigger a requirement for identification and removal of excess lands from our current urban designations. So I think that our intensification rates and our density rates can fit within what we already have designated. I can't stress enough, we can go forward and ask for lands within our own boundaries. If the region, if the crazy option number one becomes option and we are given land, we can't take that back. And if they tell us that we have to use 100 hectares out here and it becomes somebody's farmland, we can't take that farmland back. And I think that's a very important decision for us to consider, that you can never go back. We can always go back to the region and ask, once we find out where we are, if our community grows and our infrastructure is able to sustain it, we can go back and ask for more land to be given to us. And I think that's something important that we need to really think about.
Thank you, Councillor Gerber.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mayor Armstrong. I don't think any of us are suggesting that that we're in favor of option one. I don't think the staff report spoke in favor of option one. I don't think defeating Councillor Hallman's motion implies that we're going for option one. Just a question maybe to Mr. Okrafka. Do you feel that the staff report and seeking to, you know, sort of utilize the New Hamburg wastewater treatment plant capacity that we have over that horizon to 2051 would involve further lands being designated beyond what we've already designated within, you know, our countryside line here in Wilmot?
Through you, Mayor Armstrong to
Go ahead.
through you, Mayor Armstrong to Councillor Gerber. I think the intent of the staff report was to structure it to say, we're not ready to make a decision. We don't have enough information. The way that the region got to zero for land required was simply to keep reducing the population allocation to Wilmot, which is not the exercise they undertook, from what I can see, for all the other municipalities. So the equitable treatment of population allocation was not there. So we spent some time creating that graph for you showing historical population percentage for Wilmot, and what that would look like in 2051, depending on various scenarios of population. To me, that's the first focus, is to ensure that we get our equitable population, and then how we approach housing that population is a secondary thing that, again, depends on a number of factors that the region itself will set. As you can see, unlike all the other townships, typically the target was 20% or less. The region had set 45% in Wilmot. We had already had an aggressive target of 30%. Staff weren't suggesting that we couldn't do 35, or maybe we could do 36, or maybe we can only do 27. We don't know the answer to that. But again, the equitable treatment of Wilmot within that, the first three scenarios that were presented seemed to be not a constant exercise across the board, with Woolwich Township and the Breslau area receiving, tens of thousands of people, versus not using all the capacity in Wilmot's sewage treatment plant. Whether it was for residential or whether it was for employment, the capacity of that plant was not utilized. And certainly other municipalities are in the situation where the population or the employment being allocated is beyond the capacity of their existing infrastructure and will require the expansion of infrastructure, whether it's in the city of Kitchener, Cambridge, Woolwich, the Breslau area is a service to the city of Kitchener sewage plant, for example. So there's a lot of infrastructure implications to the region on these growth scenarios. What we are trying to get across is Wilmot can be self-sufficient. We've got capacity in our plant. We want to see our municipality receive its equitable share of growth, and there's the basic parameters that this council should be able to weigh in on, and that's how much land is used, how much land would be required under say a Woolwich scenario versus the Maid and Wilmot scenario. Maybe it's completely different. Maybe it's no land required. But what we're trying to get through in the staff report is there's not enough information. There hasn't been enough time, and we know that the regional preferred alternative is about to be released. So quite frankly, both the staff report and its recommendation and Councillor Hallman's motion are both, regional staff have those in their hands already. They're not necessarily waiting for the decision of this council tonight in order to decide what they're releasing later this week. They're aware of the discussions in Wilmot. They're aware of our historical attempt to minimize, other municipalities in rationalization. We were the only one who consolidated all the rural designation into the urban environment so we could intensify, and rather than developing those lands on septics, develop them on full services at a higher density. So Wilmot has a different path that we've taken historically. And I think what the staff report is to saying, we don't necessarily need to pick a preferred solution out of 1, 2, 3, or some of the other options that have been supported at this time. We should be establishing the parameters of, from a staff perspective, we want our fair shake. We want to ensure that we're just as healthy in 2051 as we are today. Quite frankly, we don't necessarily know what that looks like right now, but we don't want to necessarily close doors to what that could look like without knowing what the options are. And that's what we're trying to get through in the staff report is put more options on the table. Let's see what it all looks like, and let council make a recommendation then from everything being on the table. And realistically, by the end of this week, there'll be another option on the table for council to consider. And the region has, I guarantee it has taken into account everything they heard at the last meeting, and they've read Councillor Hallman's motion. They've read the staff report, the staff recommendation, and I'm sure that all of that information has been taken into account.
Thank you, Councillor Fanning.
I'm going to hold my peace.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gerber.
Yeah, thank you. I guess a bit of a follow-up to Director Okrafka. When you're talking about advocating for that equitable population growth, in Wilmot, which I feel is important that that we do. And you spoke of not closing doors and those sorts of things. Are there elements of the alternative motion that could be seen by the region as closing doors, or as potentially closing doors to the growth that we could get allocated?
Go ahead.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong, to Councillor Gerber. I was hoping you wouldn't ask me for my opinion on that. I don't know what the answer is. I think the answer is probably that the region has already considered all of the information, and that on the Monday night of the week it's about to release, realistically, the preferred concept has already been drafted and will be coming out. So what the implications of those resolutions, draft or otherwise, that are on the table, that will be regional staff that have interpreted that and incorporated into their preferred alternative. I don't know if that answers it, but I don't know if the resolution specifically closes doors, but there is, obviously some wording in there that, is along the lines of staff's report. From a staff perspective, we obviously support the words that we wrote. And personally, I would leave more doors wider open than maybe starting to close doors would be my recommendation to council. But I recognize that it's a controversial subject across the region. We certainly saw it with Waterloo today going in one direction, but to a certain extent that they don't really have another option other than intensification, because they built out all the Township of Waterloo that they were allocated in 1973. So, and Kitchener, not aligning necessarily with the option 4 and saying, what, we want to ensure our community is healthy, and if we need to add land, we'll add land. Is, again, I don't have the exact Kitchener resolution in front of me, but I think that's the sense that they were more leaving all the doors open, and they'd look at the preferred alternative and see what's best for Kitchener. But I think a critical piece of the Kitchener resolution was wanting equitable share of growth in the Waterloo region to be allocated to the city of Kitchener.
Follow up, Councillor Gerber?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mayor Armstrong. Yeah, just I guess one of the clauses to me that's substantively different from the alternative motion and the staff motion was, I know it was mentioned that the alternative motion refers to, utilizing New Hamburg wastewater treatment, capacity, but there's a difference between saying that unallocated capacity be sufficient to accommodate all forecasted growth, and the staff report, which encourages that capacity to fully be utilized. So we could be allocated, 4,000 people instead of 8 or 10 or 11,000 people, and that would satisfy that clause of the alternative motion. But that allocation would not necessarily satisfy the clause of the staff motion, which speaks more fully and completely towards utilizing that capacity, not just having it be sufficient for whatever we are granted. So that was just sort of one maybe substantive difference that I noted that to me seemed to not be as forceful, or to me was not advocating as fully for Wilmot, and potentially allows someone to say, well, yeah, we're following the motion we gave you. It's sufficient, but it's not being utilized fully, which I think the staff report says that more strongly.
Councillor Gordick?
Through you, Mayor Armstrong. So can I know that this is all just information, and we're probably just talking around the houses here, because like you said, the region's probably already got some sort of decision. But for me, just the clarification, we have lands that are designated for developers to build. So I'm kind of wondering why we're saying that this closes the door. There's lands in our official plan that we have designated that we can build on. Whether the developers are there or not, at the moment, it's unclear, because we don't always know what we don't know with the lands that are there available. So I don't think Councillor Hallman's, again, going back to the fact that we can go back and ask for land. We're not closing the door. I think it sends a message. I think that's what we need to understand. Personally, I need to let the region know where I stand on my commitment to climate change, on my commitment to doing affordable housing, attainable housing, to doing missing middle housing, to intensification rates that I think would help us to do better in our commitment to climate change and sustainability. Leaving the door open, I think, leads people to believe that, like, I think option 3 gave nobody any lands, and I didn't think that that was going to be a problem. Waterloo is building fine. I mean, yes, they've built out to where their capacity is, but they're doing all right. And they have utilized good planning procedures, even though they have no land left. I think that's a lesson for us to sort of look at. So again, going back to the ideas that we can ask in the future for that growth if we need it. If we already have lands that are already designated, I don't see why we're closing the door. But again, as Mr. Okrafka said, the region's probably already made some sort of decision to come back to us. And this is, I think, we just need to show intent. And what is our intent as a council? If we've told people in our community that we're for climate change, that we're for, we're standing behind our commitment to a climate emergency. We're voting tonight potentially on a smart commute program so that we are talking about carpooling. And yet on the other hand, we're saying it's okay that we want to take away greenfield and add more farmland potentially because we want to get to the capacity of our wastewater. Density doesn't always work, but intensification does. And I think that's why I brought up the comment about DC charges. It's not that that's part of the issue. I think it's just to say that we wouldn't lose DC charges by doing intensification. There are ways that we can smartly obtain those DC charges and work with the developers to keep funds coming into our community.
Mr. Krafka.
Thank you, Mayor Armstrong, to Councillor Gorgic. So a couple of things. With respect to development charges, so development charges are focused on a certain number of, basically take the population that's forecasted and calculate the number of units that would generate, and then divide the capital works into those number of units that's generated to come up with a fee per unit over the course of the growth. So the staff report is focused on population. The staff report is not focused on land area. It's focused on what population is allocated, because at the end of the day, the region is allocating population to 2051. If the population isn't allocated to Wilmot, it will be allocated somewhere else. And it's not as simple as going back and saying, hey, we'd like some more population allocated. It's not about receiving land at this stage. We don't know what the region is necessarily planning in the preferred concept, but obviously they're planning land in some communities in their 3 options, and certainly communities across the region have said that they would like additional lands. Option 4, and I know that's sort of a hot button. Option 4 really only works if everybody buys into it and if it's applied across the board. The whole idea of option 4 was, the way I understand it from Mr. Thomason, was that they saw it as a more equitable approach because no one was receiving any land. As soon as municipalities ask for land, that makes option 4 unequitable. It takes from basically rural communities and pushes that population growth to the urban community. And maybe that's good. Maybe that's what this council would like. It doesn't mean that you're absolutely correct that we have lands designated currently that will accommodate the population forecast of 28,500, which was our population forecast to 2031, and reasonably probably will be 2041 before we hit it. What that level of population doesn't do, though, and option 3, for example, proposed only 100 more people than the existing population forecast over the following 10 years from 2041 to 2051. And that's one of the concerns of staff, is if we're building at the rate that's been proposed to 2041, what happens between 2041 and 51 in a scenario where we only are assigned 100 extra people by a preferred concept? So that's the population component that we've been focused on. We tried to avoid the land component within the staff report because we're not there yet. We've got to figure out what the population we need is, and then how much can we of that can be intensification? How much can be through density? You had a prime example tonight where we have a plan that was at its public meeting stage without necessarily a lot of input, a range of 400 units to 800 units. The interesting thing with that plan is that plan would give us the opportunity to use half the amount of the land if it was approved at its max. So in front of council, at 47 or 72, whatever the people and jobs per hectare, but that's the opportunity where council can say, you know what, that plan gives us the opportunity to use half the amount of land that we normally would use for that subdivision. As you heard, our current OP is at 45 people and jobs. The region wants to include up that to at least 50 for the townships, but that's a prime example of the importance of all of these discussions and having the information on the table. Do we build a higher density subdivision in that location, close to schools, close to the rec complex, walking distance potentially to the employment lands, to the high school, WRC? From a staff perspective, probably. Like that realistically would be regardless of whether we need any land, we should be upping the density to the point where we're getting the missing middle housing and forcing that we don't need a whole lot of new singles. We need towns and stacked towns and apartments, 3-story walk-ups, maybe 4 stories. That's a good example of the opportunity that's available to us. And in all of that, I've forgotten everything else I was going to say, but certainly you're correct. We do have lands that will accommodate, historic greenfield type growth. Can we do better? We're trying to do better. We've got the highest rural intensification rate already in our OP at 30. Maybe it'll be 36. I don't know what the preferred concept coming from the region will be, but the option 4 really works where everybody agrees to it. And reasonably, it sounds like North Dumfries, the Wellesley resolution basically has the numbers of option 2 without calling it option 2, from what I can gather. Kitchener and Cambridge, it sounds like Woolwich possibly is looking at option 4 as an option. Waterloo, obviously, intensification is the name of the game for them, regardless of the option. And so it's not the Waterloo region is united on option 4 or option 3. And again, I certainly some of the components of option 4, there was a sketch put up, for example, showing that having a more dense subdivision on the edge of a city creates problems because they're further away from the core. Well, that doesn't really apply in a rural environment. A subdivision on the edge of New Hamburg or Baden, and I'm not saying that that's what we need, but we had one tonight, a subdivision on the edge of Baden or New Hamburg, as we saw tonight, at a much higher density is still a walkable community where you're still in walking distance to the core and the amenities. The same subdivision on the edge of Kitchener, if you're on the edge of Trussell, you're not walking anywhere except maybe to the bus stop to go to Sunrise Center or the boardwalk. But it's in that regional vision and the option 4 vision and the graphic that was put up. It makes sense in a city environment that building high density on the edges of the city is probably counterproductive to intensifying, but that's not what rural communities are doing. Whether it's Wellesley, whether it's Ayr, St. Jacobs, Elmira, Baden, New Hamburg, our greenfield lands really give us the best opportunity to get that missing middle housing that we need, in concert with intensification, like the Mill District in Baden would be a prime example, or on Peel Street in New Hamburg. But it's all that information should be on the table at once is really what staff were saying. We're not saying to open doors. We're not saying to close doors. We're simply saying we didn't have enough information to provide to you, in our opinion, to make a decision on any of those 3 options. And again, sound like a broken record, but as we know, the preferred concept's coming out this week from the region of Waterloo.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Fanning.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Armstrong. We're kind of arguing back and forth between one motion and another, which, as I see it, and as various people were talking, I was looking over the motions again. They're not really at odds with each other. The original proposed motion from staff, which, Mr. Krafka certainly explained well, is not at odds with the motion brought by Councillor Holman. And the one thing that would sort of bring them together further would be a minor amendment to add, if the mover and seconder are amenable, to add that the, so where we have that Wilmot Township requests all scenarios for growth to 2051 for Wilmot Township, Wilmot ensure the unallocated capacity of the New Hamburg wastewater treatment plant is sufficient. Put into there that we also request that that be utilized over creating new capacity elsewhere in the region. This capacity exists. And then when we're talking about allocating growth to various communities, it doesn't make sense for our region to be allocating growth to another part of the region, another township or city, where they have to add capacity. And, you know, if we can add a piece in there to address that, you know, that we don't lose the relevance that we have today within the region, you know, in terms of the percentage of population of the region as it stands for Wilmot Township. If we dwindle to being less than the percentage we are today, we lose our voice a little bit. How much? Who knows? That, you know, is something that's hard to define and hard to say. But I do agree that losing that growth would negatively impact our position and potentially actually negatively impact our ability to protect farmland, the rest of the farmland in the future. So I think that for me, I really don't see the two motions being at odds with each other. There's simply a small piece that's not there in Councillor Holman's motion. And there's a lot of other sort of value statements that are the business of council to provide and not something that staff is typically that is not typically staff's role to provide, and that has been provided by council. So I think that for me, if the mover and seconder are amenable and the rest of council agrees, if we can add in that the growth maintain Wilmot's position relative to the other communities in the region, and that we not be allocated less growth than would be required to maintain that relative position.
Thank you, Councillor Gerber.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Armstrong. I just think rather than once again go down the road where we're amending motions on the fly, that we have a motion before us that we've had time to consider, that we can vote on it. If we're happy with Councillor Holman's motion the way it is, it passes. If we're not, it doesn't. I'm just not sure what else we're going to have to say. I mean, there's other, like, if we're just going to go through it line by line and start changing the pieces of it. I mean, we have two to pick from. I'd be quite comfortable to pretty much call the first question and then see that may be the only question we have to call. Whether we're going to, you know, we should do we're going to do a recorded vote, who's all voting, maybe straighten all that stuff out as well.
Okay, thank you. And just to let you know, I will be voting on this. Councillor Holman.
Thanks for the mayor. Our job as elected officials is through policy. And so this is the place to do that as an open and transparent council. So I'm okay with the amendments that Councillor Fenning has suggested. I think that makes sense. So as I moved it, I know Councillor Gordick would have to second the amendment that Councillor Fenning has made, but I'm okay with that. So this is the place to do it, and this is why we're all here. So yeah, I'm in favor of that amendment that Councillor Fenning has made.
So I've unmuted myself through the mayor.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. So in fact, this morning watching the Kitchener one to sort of see where they were going, that's exactly what they do in Kitchener. They went through their motion line by line and actually did go through their motions, and they had 2 on the floor that they actually highlighted and had to have that conversation. So it's our job to make sure that we do the best thing that we can. So I believe that Councillor Fenning's amendment suits exactly it. It covers what Mr. Krafka has basically stated in his staff report, is that we use our capacity. We shouldn't lose out and have, say, the city of Kitchener build a brand new wastewater system so that they can utilize their land when we already have land, already have the capacity here. So I think that friendly amendment to the motion sort of encompasses what we're trying to get at, is we want to be able to sustain the growth that we have, but not lose out to Kitchener, who might have to build a brand new plant in order to keep their growth. So I'm in favor of accepting Councillor Fenning's motion, and if that's okay for our clerk to add Councillor Fenning's to that. I think it's the 3rd paragraph. Oh, actually, no, it's a bigger, 4th or 5th paragraph with regards to that. I'd be fine with that friendly amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Gerber.
I mean, to me, the main focus in my thoughts tonight was that we forcefully explained to the region that the growth that's been allocated to us historically, that we have the capacity for, that we receive. So if that motion reads that rather than, that the wastewater be sufficient, that wastewater treatment plant facility be utilized, and we call on it to be utilized, I think that's great. I mean, again, if we're going to go through a clause by clause, I mean, there's a lot of other clauses in here, like, we can recommend, I mean, we're recommending things be delayed. We know they're not going to be. We're talking about receiving a consultant's report. Well, we're not going to receive it. There's a lot of other sort of wish lists in there, which is fine. We can sort of make those statements of what we would like to see. But to me, the core of the staff report that I wanted to see passed along to the region was that growth, that population, that equitable population growth, that Wilmot needs. We're the only people that can advocate for that. So if we're advocating for that tonight, and the lead into that motion is not that it's just sufficient, that we're calling for it to be utilized, especially, and I agree, I mean, the climate emergency isn't solved if they allocate 40,000 units to Breslau and have to build a new wastewater management plant somewhere else. I mean, it makes far better sense to utilize what's here. So I think that'd be great.
Thank you, Councillor Fanning.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Armstrong. I can repeat the language that I was proposing for the clerk, if that's acceptable. But I saw Councillor Fisher had his hand up, so maybe he had something else he wanted to say. Okay. So my proposed amendment was to add, and I had anywhere in there that makes sense, that the Wilmot be allocated sufficient growth to maintain its relative position to other communities within the region. Because wastewater management or no, if the just to sort of summarize what everybody's been saying here, which is why I put that specific piece in. Regardless of wastewater management, if we don't ask to receive an equitable share of the total growth, we will lose our position within the region. So that Wilmot I'm waiting for a moment. So for the clerk, that Wilmot receive its equitable share of the total growth in order to maintain relative position with the other communities in the region.
And if you could please repeat that just one more time. I'm a slow writer. That Wilmot be received its allocated equitable share.
That Wilmot be allocated its equitable share of the total growth in the region in order to maintain its relative position to the other communities in the region.
Okay, we have it between us and we'll just reread it. Christina, if you can reread.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So Councillor Fenning, what you're proposing is to add the phrase that Wilmot be allocated its equitable share of its total growth in the region to maintain its relative position to the other communities in the region. Did I get that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and you just want us, my understanding is you want it inserted somewhere in the second last clause that begins with that Wilmot Township requests all scenarios for growth to 2051, et cetera. Is that the clause you wish to have it inserted into?
Yes.
Okay. If I may ask, previously you had also mentioned that after the word sufficient within that clause, that also be required to utilize the new Hamburg wastewater treatment plant capacity over adding capacity elsewhere. Do you still wish for something for that to be inserted into that paragraph as well?
Yes, and you've actually remembered exactly what I wanted.
Okay. All right. So we're actually making two friendly amendments to the second last clause of the alternative motion.
That's correct.
Okay. I think we've got it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I see no further hands, so. Oh, yes, we do. Councillor Gerber.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to say that that's great to see those directions added. I mean, I know we've spoken a lot at times. I mean, we've spoken a lot about the climate emergency as well. And I think that point that, allocating, residential units where there isn't capacity doesn't make sense compared to where the capacity resides. So I like to see that. We've seen, a development report tonight that has some, that obviously has sustainability intensification and density targets built into it that are more like what we want to see moving forward into the future. I know we've spoken at times about the value of a diverse, inclusive, and welcoming community. And the bottom line is that, that diverse, inclusive, vibrant, welcoming countryside community that Wilmot aspires to be is harder to achieve if we're not allocated population growth. And to see us open to that tonight and asking the region to maintain that and to use what we have here and to welcome people into our community, I think that's great to see. So looking forward to voting on the motion as amended.
Okay, thank you. As I said, I will be voting on this and I will get to vote again at the region when it comes up. My concerns are that, and it's in the staff report, that the region is not providing sufficient information to actually make a good response and to come up with something that is healthy for us. And my question is, why are they in such a big hurry to push this through without providing us the information we need to make an educated decision? That is a concern to me, which I will express at regional council. Another thing that bothered me was there was a lot of talk about breaching the countryside line. And there was no talk in the report about breaching the countryside line. And we already know that from the motion from Waterloo that they have reiterated that they're in strong support of maintaining the countryside line, which is something that has been done and supported at regional council since its inception in 73. So it has been very strong. It's not to say that, you know, a new council with all new people could come up with a different scenario, but we hope that will never happen. So I want people to understand that, you know, what staff were asking for in the report of the 42 or 43 hectares, whatever it was coming from 303 hectares that are within the countryside line in between New Hamburg and Baden. And that allocation for development between the two municipalities was hammered out some 20 years ago, that is where we're going to designate our development because the amenities are here. And that's why there was, you know, the countryside line was developed around the villages, and that any development in those villages would be infill. So I am concerned that what we send to the region, that they don't listen to. I mean, I've been mulling it over in my brain for the last couple of weeks that, you know, the regional staff say that they've had all these consultations and that they're listening. But unfortunately, when they come out with their reports, and we'll know later this week if they've actually been hearing what they've been, what we've been trying to tell them. And it's not just us, it's the other municipalities in the region are trying to tell them that, there needs to be a more equitable distribution, and that they need to be not only listening, but hearing what we have to say. And I think our staff have done an excellent job of advising us of what their opinion is with their expertise as a planning staff, which, we've been very fortunate here to have planning staff that have, monitored our growth with the capacity that we can handle it. And that's always been important, as we know there are municipalities around the province that didn't have that support. They didn't have that. There's a couple of municipalities that are in real trouble because they overdeveloped. And we've been very fortunate not to. So I'm not sure I can support this, because I think the township staff's report kind of addresses the things that concern me. And that is the fact that the region is pushing this in a little too quickly for whatever reason they have. I don't know. I wish I knew. But I think that our biggest thing that we should be doing is having them step back and reviewing and making sure they can provide us with the information we need to either support what they're doing or not support. And I think that's something that's falling short on us right now. Okay. So you have the recommendation before you and the alternative motion, which has been amended, a friendly like amendment. And we shall call the question. All those in favor? And those opposed? It is carried. So it will go, and regional staff will have a chance to look at it. And fortunately, I will have an opportunity to try and question staff's motives for pushing things through without providing us all the information that we should have. Councillor Fenning, or Gordick, sorry.
Through you, Mayor, I'm kind of confused. You said recommendation and motion. So what did we just vote on? Because I kind of got lost on what you were actually asking. Were we voting on Councillor Hallman's motion? And if so, I wanted to just clarify that because I just wasn't sure. So we did? Okay, perfect. Thank you. Appreciate that. I just kind of got a little lost there for a second.
Sometimes we confuse the word motion and recommendation as being the same. Okay. So that was carried. So, what's that? Okay. Yep. So the next item is the Wilmot Smart Commute program. And we'll have Ms. Jackson present the report, please.
Thank you, Mayor Armstrong. I appreciate that. So this report provides a response to a council request to create a Wilmot Smart Commute program for local and area residents. Throughout COVID, carpooling was a lower priority with many people working from home. However, timing is good to initiate this program today as more and more people are returning to the workplace. This report recommends that dedicated carpool spaces be identified with signage at the Wilmot Recreation Complex, Kirkpatrick Park, New Dundee Community Center, and the Baden Administrative Complex once the parking lot is expanded. The addition of these spaces will promote the reduction of greenhouse gases and will result in positive environmental impacts. Consultation was sought through the Sustainability Committee, and public comment will be monitored as the project rolls out to determine if spaces are in the best possible locations. Criteria that we used to determine these locations included proximity to Highway 78 or the 401 corridor, parking lot that we recommend has winter maintenance, that the parking lot has ample parking spaces to ensure facility users are not impacted, and that parking spaces are highly visible from the street or in a high vehicular traffic area to increase security of vehicles being left alone unattended for long hours. So that's kind of a summary of the report, and I'm happy to answer any questions that council may have. Thank you.
So first we'll read the recommendation, Mr. Clerk, and then we'll have questions afterwards.
That report PFRS 2022-023 be received for information, and further, that council endorse the proposed Wilmot Smart Commute program locations, namely 4 spaces at the Wilmot Recreation Complex, 2 spaces at the Kirkpatrick Park parking lot, and 2 spaces at the Wilmot Administration Complex upon completion of the parking lot expansion project, and 2 spaces at the New Dundee Community Center.
Thank you, sir. And that is moved by Councillor Hallman, second by Councillor Gordick. Comments, Councillor Hallman.
Thank you for this report, Ms. Jackson. This is something that's been near and dear to my heart for some time when I brought this motion before COVID. Thank you for getting this report to council while I was still sitting in this chair. I greatly appreciate it. And I'm very excited to see these come to fruition. Thank you.
And I see no further comments or questions. Call the question. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. There is no correspondence. Bylaws. Ask the clerk to read the recommendation on the bylaws.
That bylaw number 2022-26 be read a first, second, and third time and finally passed in open council. 14.1, Bylaw 2022-26, being a bylaw to confirm the establishment of a highway in the Township of Wilmot, Redford Drive.
Thank you. That is moved by Councillor Fenning, second by Councillor Hallman. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Since item 15.2 has been withdrawn, there are only two notices of motion this evening, which were referred from May 30th, 2022 meeting, and there are several delegations for these items. Before commencing with hearing from delegations, I would like to remind all delegations for this evening of some guidelines for participation. Delegations will be allotted 7 minutes to speak. We also ask that you leave the meeting once your issue has been addressed. You are then welcome to watch the remainder of the meeting being brought webcast live via YouTube. If you conduct yourself in any of the following manners, it will result in an immediate muting and removal from the meeting. Interrupting councillors, staff, or other delegations, derogatory statements about councillors, staff, or others, hate speech, or defamatory comments. Okay, so the first item is the No Nuisance Noise Ontario, and call upon staff to display Councillor Hallman's notice of motion concerning the motion. And as you've seen it there, and you do have it in your package, then I will call on the first delegation, Mr. Kevin Thomason. Welcome back, Kevin. You have
Good
7
evening.
minutes, sir.
Excellent. Thank you. I'll only need a minute or two for this one. Honorable Mayor, members of council, and guests. My name is Kevin Thomason, and as I mentioned earlier, I live at 1115 Cedar Grove Road, and I'd like to speak in support of this no nuisance noise motion. I once heard it said that a noisy motorbike in Manhattan at night can awake 250,000 people. And while some people think that noise is just an urban issue, noise can be a significant rural issue, particularly in an environmentally sensitive landscape, such as what we have in parts of Wilmot Township. Currently, we have right close to my home, and just meters from a paved road, a pair of nesting bald eagles raising 2 eaglets. Eagles aren't always a human-tolerant species, and they can be driven from their nests by human interaction, loud noises, and either interference. Firecrackers are another issue that can be absolutely fatal to birds, bats, even dogs and horses, but that is a topic for another night. Some cities, such as Paris, France, are installing automated speed camera-like microphones, similar to photo radar, to automatically issue tickets to vehicles exceeding noise limits based on problems with excessively noisy mufflers, like this motion is designed to deter. While I'm not suggesting we need to be installing automated cameras here in Wilmot, it does recognize the significance of this issue and the link that other jurisdictions are going to address it. This is an excellent motion, and I thank Councillor Hallman for bringing it forward and fully support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. So, Councillor Hallman, do you wish to comment on your motion?
Thank you, through the mayor. Thank you, Mr. Thomason, for your delegation this evening in support of this motion. This is something that, as we intensify our community, it's becoming more aware of the sounds. And I also know that many members of the community have becoming more increasingly frustrated as workforces also, people sleeping during the day as shift workers, and simple things like being awakened by noisy mufflers can really be problematic. So hopefully this will encourage the appropriate parties to take this more seriously, and we can continue to move in a positive direction, and maybe in the future look at the great examples that France is doing.
Thank you. Councillor Fisher.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong. Couple questions to Councillor Hallman. I know I read this motion, and things I was thinking about is, and maybe you've researched this a little bit, I don't know, Councillor Hallman, but how many police cars are there in Ontario? How many vehicles are in the road that are modified, ballpark? And how much do these devices cost that we're asking police departments to put in their cars?
Do you have an answer for him, Councillor Hallman?
Thanks for your question, Councillor Fisher. I cannot comment on those specific numbers. If I had them ahead of time, I would have absolutely had that prepared for you. At the AMO, I had a great opportunity to connect with OPP, RCMP, and different police services. And one of the things at the courses that I attended there was talking about this. So with this opportunity to bring this motion before you this evening was something that had kind of been on my mind for quite some time, and getting to share it with us here. This is something that I think most municipalities are kind of looking at addressing, and as I said, like through policing. So this is something that obviously police budgets are not something that is dealt with at our level of government, but looking at advocating to the levels of government that do, as they're exploring different financial opportunities as to what impacts people's quality of life. And at what point do we take that more seriously and encourage that? So with those devices, you know, police cars become more sophisticated. I'm sure you've talked to some residents who will get pulled over on the road and they don't understand how they don't see the radar. Well, police cars now are equipped with detections of speed in all directions around their vehicle. So they don't need to just point to, you know, the traditional gun that we see in movies. Sophisticated technology exists, and it's becoming more readily available and more cost effective. So by sending this message to the appropriate parties, we're sending the message that with rallying across Ontario, that we hope that we invest in technology like this, and it will become, you know, more affordable as the time goes on as well. What was your other question? I'm wondering if you have a follow-up, if I did address that or not.
Yeah, you did. No, it's all right to speak there, Mayor Armstrong. Okay.
Go ahead.
I did a little bit of research. I know there's 1,200 OPP police cars. Waterloo region, I think there's 1,000 police officers. So I'm guessing 3 shifts, maybe that's 300 police cars. And I know at this time right now, certainly a lot of police departments are struggling to find money to just do their basic jobs. But I'm not opposed to it. I'm just, there's certainly a lot of costs that was, and the other one too is Harley Davidsons. There's a ton of them. There's a ton of them out there, and they're just as loud. So
there's a thing. Racing is something that I'm passionate about. I used to work traveling with a superbike team, and the noise on the track is where it should be, right? That was one of the things that I passionately believe in, is that racing is fun, and I personally love it myself. I own a dirt bike, but at the track is where it should be. And so what this, you know, think about, and I ask you to compare, you know, we have installed how many speed radar cameras, and we've seen that investment work out for us. So I think that same thing is that it would be absolutely absurd to assume that this would be on every single police car, but perhaps departments would invest in the technology that has been proven across Europe and then slowly go from there. I think it's absolutely absurd to think that it would be on every single police car. And as we all know as well, you know, like Oktoberfest, they invest more heavily into drinking and driving and that sort of thing. So again, perhaps this would encourage police stations or similar police bodies to invest in the equipment and use it at the appropriate time with financial responsibility. But to comment on your Harley Davidson thing, there's a large difference between vehicles being built and the engines that occupy that, as a low rumble of a lovely Corvette does not make the same sound as a modified Civic with a very loud tailpipe. Those are very different things, very different decibels. And but sending that right message about what we stand for in the community we want to live in. And as you know, Kevin even addressed, thinking about nature and going in that direction is in my opinion the right thing to do.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fenning.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Armstrong. I actually have an answer, a couple things for you, Councillor Fisher. I have a decibel meter. As part of our workplace, there are a lot of noisy machines, and I'm responsible to ensure that my workforce is protected from noise. So we have a decibel meter, a handheld unit that you can walk around and measure very accurately. It cost about $80. And just while you were, I thought, well, I wonder if prices have gone up. A quick Google search shows that they're anywhere from $26 to $500. So I'd imagine police would probably invest, somewhat over the $26 mark, but it's perhaps not as expensive as we might think. And I would imagine it would be deployed, I would think, in the traffic division cars, not all cars. And yeah, I mean, it's really, I have experience doing that measurement for equipment. So it's really quick, easy, and very accurate within a couple seconds. So yeah, and anything sustained sound over 80 decibels is detrimental to our hearing. So if you're looking at that amount of engine noise and traffic, and one of our directors probably could talk about the traffic studies and noise impacts from roads.
Thank you. Well, something that's always amazed me is that the fact that there are people out there that still believe that the louder the vehicle, the faster it goes. Okay, do we have let's see here. We have a couple of delegations.
Point of procedure.
Mover,
We're supposed
seconder.
to, yeah, we need to call its question.
Yep. I have a seconder for the motion. Councillor Fenning. And we'll call the question. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Next item is Wilmot Township Build It Right the First Time. And have someone have staff display Councillor Fenning's motion. And you all have a copy of this. And we have some delegations. And the first delegate will be Barbara Schumacher.
Thank you very much, Mayor and councillors and staff,
Welcome,
for
Barb.
the opportunity to speak to this motion. Thank you. On behalf of 50 by 30 WR, I wish to relay to you our full support for the motion Wilmot Township Build It Right the First Time, which requests that the province include in the next Ontario Building Code higher energy performance requirements in tiers and timelines to more rapidly conform with the National Model Building Code. In addition, we endorse the request for municipal authority to require green development standards with higher tier energy performance and for provincial facilitation of capacity building and education and training across the spectrum of municipal developer and construction professionals regarding implementation of the National Model Building Code. When 50 by 30 WR came to Council last June to support Transform WR Community Climate Action Strategy and a higher aspirational emissions reduction of 50% by 2030, we recognized that municipalities need action by federal and provincial levels of government to achieve emission reductions, which will limit global heating to 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2050. Greenhouse gas emissions from buildings in Waterloo region comprise 45% of the total emissions, and reduction of the emission source from buildings is a key strategy presented by the Climate Action WR team. So thank you for recognizing the value that moving quickly to net zero buildings will make on reducing energy consumption in our region. And as you consider passing this motion, and we hope you do, we will be applauding the leadership you will be showing, not only to other municipalities in the region of Waterloo, but right across the province. So thank you very much for presenting this motion. We fully support it.
Thank you, Barbara. Well done. And I see no questions. So our next delegation is Kevin Thomason. Welcome again, Kevin.
Good evening. Good evening. You can hear me okay?
We can.
Excellent. Thank you. Honorable Mayor, councillors, and guests. My name is Kevin Thomason. I still live at 1115 Cedar Grove Road, and I am one of the co-founders of Green WR, a new community group founded about 4 months ago here in Wilmot, following the Cachet Homes MZO, to advocate for green development standards, better design, and better sustainability. We're lucky to be part of one of the fastest growing areas in Canada. And as much as we're growing, as you're well aware, we're also in a climate crisis that is getting more concerning every day. We all know that rapid change is required and that we aren't moving fast enough. Increasingly concerned Canadians are demanding that our governments do more, while our youth are extremely concerned about the future they'll be facing. The good news is that we already have many of the solutions that we require, and we know what needs to be done. It just isn't happening fast enough. We also know that despite all the global treaties and national programs, that many of the most impactful climate actions we can undertake are here at the local level. We can design our communities to be more sustainable, complete, and compact. We can better facilitate public transit and active modes of transportation. We can undertake actions to protect farmland, water aquifers, and natural areas. We can build and retrofit far more efficient buildings that utilize better energy sources. Many of these much needed actions fall into the broad heading of green development standards. And here in Waterloo region, our new group Green WR is being created to see how we can encourage and accelerate the adoption of green development standards by the region of Waterloo and our area municipalities. This motion before you tonight, the Wilmot Township Build It Right the First Time motion, is one of these first initiatives. This motion recognizes that much of our emissions come from buildings, that Wilmot has adopted greenhouse gas reduction targets of 50% by 2030 and 80% by 2050 in line with the Paris Accord. that our buildings are too often built only to the minimum of the Ontario Building Code, which can be quite insufficient, and that both the provincial government and federal government timelines to reach higher energy performance standards, such as net zero, are simply too far into the future. That we can't be waiting until 2030 for better standards when tens of thousands of buildings to be built in the coming years could already be achieving higher standards, enjoying lower operating costs, and improved climate resilience. And that is far more cost effective to build it right the first time, particularly when we know what needs to be done. We urge Wilmot Council to approve this motion tonight to help send a strong message to the province and let them know how concerned our citizens are about climate change, as well as the need for faster action on the required solutions. In the days and weeks and months ahead, the regional official plan update and then the ensuing official plan updates will provide other opportunities to start to implement a variety of green development standards in our community. Our new community group will be back to work with you on these initiatives for climate leadership in the months ahead. In conclusion, our planet is at a breaking point. We have only 91 months remaining to have our greenhouse gas emissions by an ambitious 50% to meet our Paris Accord commitments. We all know that we need to be doing better, and this is an immediate opportunity to act. Our region is renowned for being pioneers, be it the blue box that is now a global standard, our ESVA areas, our countryside line, rapid transit, no smoking bylaws, and so many other things that are now taken for granted, despite being very bold and ambitious at the time. Green development standards will be another important area where our community can pioneer solutions and lead. Please endorse this motion and let's see what our community can accomplish. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Well done.
Thank you.
Our next delegation is KLG.
Hello. Hello.
Hi, Kay.
I'm KLG. I'm a Waterloo resident, longtime community activist, and like Kevin, a member of the new citizens group called Green WR. Kevin's made a lot of the points that I already have, so I'll quickly run through my slides because I have some pictures. So if you go to the next slide. True enough, we are here tonight because of the climate crisis, which you've talked about at length tonight, and I really appreciate the concern that you've expressed about this and how you as a township will meet this. And certainly you did commit to climate action back in 2019. And next slide, you furthered this by committing to the request by 50 by 30 Waterloo region to say that we needed to do better than the original recommendation and make a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. But as Kevin said, we just saying we're going to do it isn't enough. We need to take action, and we know what kinds of things we can do that will do that. And a lot of these come under things called green development standards. And so this particular motion tonight is like a little first step towards what we hope will be a much bigger movement later on. Next slide, please. And this one, I can give you a little bit of background on this too. Like it recognizes that most of our buildings today are built to the minimum of the Ontario Building Code, which is quite insufficient to get us to meet our target of 50% building reductions by 2030. And we do have guidelines on how to do this. I mean, there's just been recently a new national model building code released by the National Research Council, in March. And as you can see, there's a number of tiers to get to the point where every building in Canada would be a net zero building, which means a building that consumes no more energy than it produces. And so what this motion, which was actually introduced in Waterloo by Jeff Henry, and we've been taking around to other municipalities, it says, let's do this in Ontario. But here's this model building code, and what it says is, rather than keep on going building energy polluting hogs from now until 2030, let's start on it now. And here the National Building Model Building Code lays out 5 steps to this goal and a timeline for gradually raising the minimum standards till we get to this highest level. So sounds good, right? Sounds like a pretty reasonable approach. Next slide. Unfortunately, the Ontario Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, the ministry that oversees the building code, didn't think we needed this. And Steve Clark proposed that Ontario just disregard this gradual approach and not implement this timeline for increasing the minimum energy performance standards step by step to the highest energy tier. And the minimum energy performance that the Ontario Building Code proposes do not materially improve on the old standards. So it's like a step backward. And as you can see by this slide, there was this opportunity to comment on the minister's recommendation to the Environmental Registry of Ontario. And I know a number of people did that. They haven't released their decision yet. And so we're hoping that Wilmot Council will be another force, I guess, to contact the ministry directly to ask it to bring Ontario's building code in line with the new model building code that's been developed by the National Research Council. Next slide. And so, as Kevin mentioned, there's lots of studies showing that it's much more efficient and cheaper to do it now. And developers actually have told us over and over that they're happy to build to higher standards as long as everyone is doing it. And mandatory higher standards will level the playing field and help us achieve our 50 by 30 targets. So next slide. So, and as Kevin pointed, it is cheaper. What we're asking, it's more efficient to build it right the first time and to help do our part to fight the climate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay.
Right.
See no questions. So, Councillor Fanning, would you like to speak to your motion?
Thank you, through you, Mayor Armstrong. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time. I think, you know, this council has repeatedly stood behind its decision to act on climate change. And I think this is just another way that we can continue to strengthen and stand behind that position that we took years ago already. I hope that the province is listening, and I look forward to seeing this passed forward. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a seconder for Councillor Fanning's motion. Councillor Hallman. And we have no further speakers, so I'll call the question. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. So next we come to announcements. I'll start off with, I have 3 announcements to make. June 21st is National Indigenous Peoples Day. This is a day for all Canadians to recognize and celebrate the unique heritage, diverse cultures, and outstanding contributions of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Although these groups share many similarities, they each have their own distinct heritage, language, cultural practices, and spiritual beliefs. I encourage community members to recognize this day through listening and learning about Indigenous history in Canada as we travel together on a path to truth and reconciliation. Next announcement is June is also Recreation and Parks Month. We are encouraging everyone to celebrate all month long by getting active and enjoying nature. With almost 58 kilometers of existing trails and 24 parks to discover and enjoy in Wilmot, There's no shortage of ways to get active and connect with nature. Visit wilmot.ca/JRPM for more information. So our recreation department is providing everybody with an opportunity to get out and enjoy the fresh air. Lastly, nominations are still being accepted for Citizen of the Year awards. These awards are given to individuals who have demonstrated all-around community involvement, recognizing local residents who build communities and show what can be achieved with passion and determination. For more information, please visit wilmot.ca/Citizen of the Year. And Councillor Fisher.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong. Things are starting to happen in Baden again. Car shows have started the first week of June. Concerts at the castle begin July 7th. And food trucks. We're down at the pond tonight. So lots of fun stuff happening in Baden now that COVID's loosening its grip.
Thank you, Councillor Fisher. And it was a great fishing derby that the VCA hosted, and they apparently had a great turnout. I'm surprised that Councillor Fisher didn't mention the fishing. Councillor Hallman.
Thank you, through the mayor. Wanted to thank the Mannheim Optimist for hosting a fishing derby last Wednesday. So many youth in the community had an absolute blast with that. So my heartfelt thanks to them for continuing to put on great community programming for the kids. They certainly enjoy it. Also wanted to mention that although it's recognized in the United States, which is also recognized here in Canada, June 19th is Juneteenth Day, and it's commemorating the emancipation of enslaved Black people. So take reflection that day as well. And as the mayor had mentioned, June 21st is Indigenous History Day, and we want to take extra pause as I have been in connection with Indigenous people in the community who are actively looking for, and there'll be more announcements soon for more remains being found. And did also want to mention that July 1st, we will be bringing back Canada Day in Wilmot. And it has been a year-long journey of working closely with the Indigenous community to find a path forward on what allyship and our two nations together, and going back to recognize the Tubra Wampum, the original treaty of what forward together should look like. And it's going to be a really important day in demonstrating allyship and moving forward together. And if you're looking for more information, please visit the website at Canada Day in Wilmot. And I also wanted to finish with the last statement of this is a big emotional year for many youth in our community, as it's the first year in 3 years that the grade 6s, the grade 8s, and the grade 12s will be having a traditional graduation and celebration with families, with photos, and celebrating their achievements. So my heartfelt thanks to all the educators, as this has been the first spring rush, and I'm sure Councillor Gerber can attest to what that spring rush feels like, getting the kids through to the home stretch, and all the hard work, and looking forward to these celebrations. So my thanks to everyone, and I hope if you have children and youth in your life who are celebrating these milestones, that it's extra special to have them back in our lives this year, as everyone has worked hard to get through the pandemic.
Thank you. Okay. Next, there was no closed meeting today, so the next item is the confirmatory bylaw, and have the clerk read that, please.
That bylaw numbers 2022-27 and 2022-28 be read a first, second, and third time, and finally passed in open council.
Thank you. That is moved by Councillor Gerber and Councillor Gordick. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Next is the adjournment. Mr. Clerk, please.
That we do now adjourn to meet again at the call of the mayor.
And that is moved by almost everybody. Councillor Hallman, Councillor Gordick. All right. All in favor? Perfect. That is carried. Thank you. And thank you everyone who attended. And appreciate you tuning in. Thank you very much and have a good evening, everyone.